Welcome back, everybody. I'm very, very pleased for our second session and an entirely different approach to editing. Someone who's worked with directors across a broad band of experience and approach, and has just come from finishing the latest James Bond film, The Untold Story.
The documentary, not Skyfall.
Documentary.
So don't ask me about Skyfall, otherwise I'd be shot.
And was in her sequence on Monday night for the premiere. But we're not going to show that, but we are going to listen to Claire for a lot of really good information about how to work with directors of varying experiences. So please welcome Claire Ferguson.
So how many of you, are you all filmmakers or editors? Want to be editors? It's just good to find out where you're all coming from. I'm going to talk to you, start off talking to you a bit about the process of editing, and then take you through various clips of films of where I've had particular challenges as an editor to make those films. I'm going to talk to you in detail about what those challenges were and how I overcame them, because every film you make is a challenge, and every experience you have is different, and in a way you have to change your approach depending on what sort of story you are hoping to tell. But I'd just like to start by saying that as an editor, I always think I've got the best job. You're in a very, very privileged position, and you're in a very trusted position. You're the person who has and will have the most intimate knowledge of all of those rushes and all of the archive than anybody. Probably anybody in the world in some cases. I mean, I've done a lot of films with archive with the Beatles, and there's parts of archive that actually nobody's seen apart from me. And I was very lucky 10 years ago or so to be sort of exploring the archive underneath Tottenham Court Road, where I found bits of picture but no sound of Bob Dylan, and then rehearsing with Harrison, and then bits of sound, and I managed to somehow piece them together and find this archive that actually had been put away in 1971 and discarded, and has now sort of come back. But we're going to end. I'm actually going to end with that clip, because it's probably one of the highlights of the best thing I've ever done in terms of the thrill of being an editor. I'm going to go back now and start talking about the first stages of sort of getting the job, and then what you do to tackle the beast. So the first thing is you'll meet the director, and it's at that meeting that you need to find out what is this film? What film does this director want to make? What sort of story does the director want to tell? Why does he want to make this film? Why does she want to make this film? And it's really that once you've sort of established that, your job as an editor is to execute the vision of that director. You may not share that vision. You may think, not sure, but you have to believe in it, and you have to believe that you can do that and have the confidence. And the next stage is to look at the material. Or maybe nothing's been shot yet. So you would then have a discussion about what is going to be shot to tell that story, and what characters are there, and do we have a plan of how to shoot this in order to tell that story, to execute that vision that you've got. So the first stage really, once you start in the cutting room, is you watch your rushes. And for me, I shut the world out and I put my headphones on, and I don't speak to anybody for 3 weeks. And I just go into that world completely. I don't watch any other films. I don't really speak to anybody. I just engage in that world with my headphones on. I don't want to hear anything else. And it's that initial process, it's sort of that tunnel vision process where you form that relationship with the characters. And for me, it's that first watching of the rushes that is the most precious, because it's then you have your gut reactions. It's then that you laugh at things, you cry at things, and it's those first initial reactions actually probably stay with you and are what ends up being in the film. So you may have 500 hours, but you'll just sit and watch it for 3 weeks, and if you closed your eyes after 3 weeks, you can remember all those bits, because they stay with you, because you've watched them completely undistracted and you've gone into that world. And for me, that's the most valuable experience. And I always ask, a producer and a director, before I start, I'm sorry, but I have to be able to watch all the rushes, and I just need that time. I just need that in my schedule. And if I haven't got that, I don't think I can do the job. Or I don't think I can do the job justice, because I don't feel I'm not part of it. I'm not engaged enough with it. So when you've had that time, during that time, there's the logging of the rushes, which is incredibly important. And I always log, in my little world of 3 weeks with my headphones on, I log as I go. And it's that very process of logging it yourself that makes these rushes and these moments stay with you permanently. By actually physically logging it, it sort of goes in, and for me it doesn't go away. So that whole process, and often it sort of still stays with me now on many films I've worked with. And people say, oh, get the assistant to log it. For me, no, I have to log it, because if I haven't logged it, I can't find it. And you as an editor, you need to be able to know your rushes and access them straight away, but really from up here. You can have things written down, you can have transcripts, that's all there, and you can search things, do word search, where does he say this, where does he say that. But ultimately, transcripts are great, but they will tell you what someone said, but they'll never tell you how someone said it. You're only going to get that feeling or that experience of how someone said it by actually physically watching in real time those rushes and feeling those moments, which are very, very important. And the director may say, well, where's the bit where he picks his nose? You have to know. You're going to have to sort of know, because you will have watched that whole interview, the bit where he's a bit uncomfortable, or this or that. You need to know all those little ticks. You're not going to get that from a transcript. You're not going to get body language from a transcript. So that's where I'd say that I personally, as an editor, I can't cut a corner. I can't say, well, we've only got 6 weeks to edit, you'll just have to go by the transcript. Well, for me, I probably couldn't do the job. So, and as an editor, the other thing that you need to, it sort of sounds dull, but you need to have a logging system, a very, very clear system that works for you. How are you going to log it? How are you going to access things straight away? And I tend to, when I've gone through a particular interview, I will log in terms of what someone said, as opposed to a paraphrase of this is where so-and-so talks about blah, blah, blah. I'll say, I'll probably just have a phrase that stood out that I can remember how they looked when they said it, and then I'll go straight to it and know where it was and why they said it. That's if I'm going through sort of interview and sync, which again is real time. You might have a film such as The End of the Line, which I cut, that was actually 500 hours, so I'm not exaggerating, of which there was lots of interview, but lots of extraordinary visuals and underwater footage. So you want to log that too. So I'd log that in a sort of visual bin. You could set it up on your Avid or your Final Cut Pro, so you can go to see straight away, these are my setups, as if you were doing drama. This is what's been shot for that scene. These are my setups, I can see straight away. And as you watch it, you'll find amazing visuals that have to be in the film, because they're just amazing. So I would log then and there. You're not going to have another chance to go back and find them. So again, that first 3 weeks you have is is so important that you use it, because you won't get another chance to go back and look at it. That's your time, just, you know, very precious. So again, that's about sort of finding a system that works for you. As an editor, you're also responsible and need to know about the technical side and the technical workflow. So you need to know from the day it's shot, you know, in terms of sound and picture, how am I actually going to deliver that onto, is it television, is it cinema, is it for the cinema screen? How do I actually, how do I see that workflow panning out? And am I prepared? Have I made sure that all my audio sample levels are right? Have I made sure that my frame rates are correct? Am I shooting at the right frame rate? Will I be projecting for the cinema, or will I be projecting for film? Will I be projecting in America? Blah, blah, blah. All these sort of very sort of, at the time, very easy to overlook, very easy to get wrong, very, very expensive to put right. And you're responsible for that. You need to know, and you need to know before you start working on the project exactly how you're gonna, how it's gonna end up, and have a workflow that you can discuss with your producer. Now, I'm now going to talk about the edit itself, and different storytelling approaches to particular films. Now, the first film I'm going to talk to you about is Eileen, The Life and Death of a Serial Killer, which was the first feature documentary I edited in 2002, directed by Nick Broomfield. I'll tell you a bit about this film first. Nick Broomfield directed a film 10 years previous to this called Aileen, The Selling of a Serial Killer. And it's about Eileen Warnos, who shot 7 men. She worked as a hitchhiking hooker. She shot 7 men, and she's on death row. And her story was sold, and in fact her story ended up becoming Monster, the Charlize Theron feature, about 10 years ago. Actually, it was shortly after we finished Eileen. So a big story at the time. She was branded as America's first female serial killer. And so Nick had made this film back in 1992. In 2002, he was subpoenaed. He was actually in the middle of making Biggie and Tupac, and was subpoenaed. Eileen had maintained all the while on death row that she had killed in self-defense, and she had then decided to change her plea, and then insisted that the whole thing was done in cold blood. So what the film is about, really, I mean, it's a series of interviews with Eileen, and it's really about the American judicial system, and do we allow a woman to commit legal suicide by changing her plea because she wants to die, because death row is so bad? So it's raising a lot of questions about the death penalty. So I'm going to show you the first clip with Nick Broomfield in court, where he is subpoenaed to give evidence about Eileen's case. We have clip 1, please. So that was the first scene I ever cut for Nick, and I cut a trailer for him. I'd done the Biggie and Tupac trailer, and then I cut that, and I was a bit nervous, and he came in and he saw what I'd cut, and my initial attempt, not what you've just seen, and he said I hate it. That's not what I want at all. I hate it. So I thought, God, you know, what have I done? What's the matter? And I'd come from a background of fiction. I'd been 10 years in fiction before I went into docs, and I'd been lucky to work with the most extraordinary directors in the world. And you know, the difference with fiction and doc is, as an editor, is it sounds so obvious when you say it, but fiction is about making an illusion of reality, making something that isn't real feel real. So your storytelling and your editing approach is going to be very different to doc. So if you were cutting, for example, a fiction scene of two people chatting in a cafe, you would expect from your director certain shot. You'd have a mid shot, you'd have a wide, you'd expect some close-ups of maybe people drinking their coffee, some extreme close-ups, some establishing shots, and if you were in trouble, you would have your cutaways. You could always cut to somebody sort of drinking their coffee rather nervously if you needed to, and you've always got that. You've got that cover in fiction. And the way I first put this together, I was sort of looking at A Gift Horse in the Mouth with Joan Churchill as Joan shot this. She's the most extraordinary camera woman. And both Nick and Joan are from the background of cinema verité, where you don't use cutaways. Cutaways is a big no, because it's not real. And Nick said, actually, what I want is I want that whole thing done in I want you to do the whole thing in four cuts, without any cutaways. And believe it or not, there were hours and hours of footage. It was a long day in court that day, so there's a lot of stuff shot. But then Joan shoots in such a way that you don't need to use cutaways, because she doesn't shoot. She will continue her camera motion, so you can actually just cut. You can always cut. Joan will never force you to cut as a camera woman. Her golden rule is never make your editor cut. Film it so they don't have to cut. Don't force them to cut. And that's how she films. And so that was my gift horse, and that's where I really learned about documentary filmmaking. And given this is this film that Nick has made is about truth. It's about finding out what happened. You know, did Eileen change her plea? Didn't she change her plea? Did she kill in cold blood? Did she kill in self-defense? So you've got to have your audience have got to trust you as a filmmaker, that you're not manipulating that truth, especially about something that is so important and so. This is Eileen's. This is such a crucial case, and so for me that was a real learning curve on that first scene. I mean, I was quite glad now Nick came and said that he hated it, because I think I learned everything that day about how to cut. Well, certainly how Nick's style is as a director. Nick breaks all the rules, and he doesn't care if something aesthetically isn't perfect. He's not interested in that as a director. As it so happens, his stuff is very aesthetic, but the truth is more important than the aesthetic for him. And I want to show you, the next clip I want to show you is just a sort of a further illustration of that. I, coming from this fiction background where I'd worked with Stanley Kubrick, would never have got away with a cut like this because it didn't look right. And in fiction, you're taught, well, if there's a cut that makes you sit up and think, oh, what's going on there, then somehow you've taken them out of this world, this real world that you're trying to create. So there is a sort of something to think about there as an editor of, you know, what sort of story you're trying to tell. So if we can have the second clip, which is very, very short, but we can just, if you just look closely.
And it's not that you just decided that you wanted to die and you wanted to get it over and done with, that you changed your story.
No, the reason is it's serious. There's no way, and nobody should go in that execution.
So very short clip there. I mean, what I wanted you to notice was the very ugly jump cut. I've got two extreme, well, they're not extreme close-ups. I've got two close-ups there, and I cut from close-up to close-up, jump cut. But there's an example of where it would be completely inappropriate to try and cover that jump cut. I mean, Nick would be saying, here I am, I'm making a cut, and I want you all to see the cut I'm making. Because that is actually very much part of the story. And it's another example as well of how blessed I was with Joan Churchill's camera work. Something about Joan, I don't know how she does it, but she sort of always knows where to be. She's got this kind of natural sort of instinct, I think, in her blood. Because if you watch when she says, you have to kill Eileen Warnos or she'll kill again, Joan's already going straight in on the close-up of the eyes. Now, nothing's going to tell Joan that she's about to do that. There's something in Joan's instinct that has told her to go in close, but in such a way that as a viewer, it's not self-conscious, or you don't really notice it. It just takes you into that emotion.
Is that instinct, do you think?
I think with Joan it is I do think it's instinct. I don't shoot. I've tried to shoot and I'm rubbish at it. I know what I want and I know what I don't like, and I can direct a camera. I will direct a camera, but personally, if I try and do it, I can never do what she does. I mean, obviously she's been doing it for donkey's years. I'm going to show you a clip again, which is a documentary moment. Eileen, it's Nick's penultimate visit to her in the prison, and the question here for you to think about as you watch the clip is about ethics. So let's watch it and then let's talk about afterwards, what's been captured. It's quite a chilling clip. Does anyone have any sort of gut reactions to that they want to talk about? Has anyone got any questions? But, I don't want to give my opinion yet. Maybe you've got some thoughts about whether you think how we've handled those rushes.
Something incredible about hearing the doors close and this echo that you get, which is very atmospheric. And I'm wondering if any of that was added after, or whether that was within the rushes.
Nothing was added.
Right.
Nothing was added. It's all there. It's very stark. And in those prisons, that is how it sort of sounds. The only thing that was done, because she whispers, is that we raised the level as much as we could so that everybody could hear what she was saying. So that was the only manipulation. Nothing was edited. That's as was. So we lifted that level. So we gave it so so an audience could hear. So, but yeah.
Did you feel anyway guilty when you were cutting it just because you were filming her? They were filming her unbeknownst to what she was saying.
Well, I think that's the question, and that's a really interesting one that you raise. I think when you're making films, and it'll happen all the time to all of you. There will be times when you're making a film and you have to say to yourself, is what I'm doing appropriate? Am I being manipulative? Am I being unethical here? And in most of the cases, there isn't an easy answer. There's never an easy answer to that, and it's one of the hardest things as a filmmaker that you will encounter in documentary. The biggest difference between fiction and documentary is your responsibility to your subjects, because they're real and they're real people with lives. So my answer to that is no, and didn't feel guilty at all, because effectively, yes, we are breaching her trust, but we're breaching our trust to get to a bigger truth, which is what the film's about. So I would say that Nick is completely justified in showing that clip, even though she's unwittingly admitting something that she doesn't want the whole world to hear. So he's talking about a bigger picture of the death sentence, and effectively we are executing somebody who is mad. She's innocent, and she has said, I did it in cold blood because she wants to die. So there's a big question that he's raising there.
Did she sign up to those images, that sequence being
She
dead?
was dead. She
Oh,
was
I see.
executed. By the time this film came out,
Right.
she was executed. Now, what, funnily enough, actually happened was we finished this film. It was I remember exactly when it was, what time it was, October time. And we had finished the film, and then Nick got a phone call. Jed Bush had signed her death warrant. Eileen was dying to die, and he signed her death warrant, and she had made one last request, which was that Nick would come and interview her on her final interview. So we then thought, okay, our film hasn't ended. There's more to come. So he actually went out and he did her final interview on the day before she died. he asked her to film her execution, which he declined to do. He didn't want to do that. But he did film her last interview, which I'm not going to show you a clip of that today, but I would say that, I mean, I think this is a fabulous film. I think it's probably the best thing I've ever worked on, and probably the film I've cared most about ever. You know, really cared and felt sort of so moved, and it stayed with me. It will stay with me forever, this film. I think Eileen is an extraordinary character, and very lucid. So, you know, I would recommend to watch this film. It's very interesting in terms of ethics, filmmaking, but also in terms of Eileen and her story. So yes, in answer to your question, yes, she was dead.
If she hadn't been dead, would you still have used the scene?
Well, if she hadn't been dead and she'd still been sitting, well, yes. Yes, because, I mean, there's an example of where a documentary can actually change an outcome. I mean, one of my favourite films, which I didn't cut, is The Thin Blue Line, where the actual making of the documentary can change an outcome of, you know, of a court case. So it's lots of interesting questions to be asked there. But yes, Nick would have kept it in, and actually we'd already cut that bit in before Bush signed her death warrant. So yes, it was already in the film, in answer to that question. Okay, and if you've got any more questions, just put your hands up and ask. This is all very... How am I doing for time? Is it good? I've got quite a lot to... right. Okay, so I'm now going to talk to you about a very different film with a very different feel. I'm going to talk to you about Guilty Pleasures, which was directed by Julie Moggan. And it's just so different to Eileen, it just makes a nice kind of contrast and a sort of change of pace to our talk today. Now, Nick's film, he uses voiceover, or it's not really voiceover. Nick is a character, so he's a voiceover, but he's also a character in his film. So that, as an editor, allows you to, in a way, it's sort of easier to tell a story that way when you've got a voiceover and you've got a character who's actually taking you on that journey. In terms of sort of editing process, it allows the director to actually, you can kind of get away with murder if you've got a voiceover. You can sort of go anywhere. The challenge for an editor is when you're cutting something with no voiceover and no obvious binding narrative. That's very tricky. I'm going to talk to you about Guilty Pleasures. Now, this is a film about the fantasy of love and the reality of love, seen through the prism of Mills and Boon readers, a Mills and Boon writer, and a male model who he's a cover model for the Mills and Boon book. He's a sort of female fantasy. So we've got sort of effectively, we've got 5 storylines. We've got 3 readers, we've got the male model, and we've got the writer, who is a man in his 70s called Roger, who actually, he writes under the name Jill Sanderson, so he writes under a female name, and he sort of hides himself away in the Lake District in a caravan, writing these sort of raunchy novels for young girls. So anyway, under the name of Jill Sanderson. So what I'm going to show you is the very beginning of the film, and it's a sort of introduction to these characters. I'm going to use that to just talk about how difficult it was then to sort of piece together this 90-minute film of trying to sort of make these stories interlock and tell an overall big picture. So can we go from the start of this clip, please?
She unbuckled his belt, slid his trousers downwards. He was wearing dark grey boxers, his need for her instantly apparent. He folded her into his arms again and pressed both of their nearly naked bodies together. Clever hands unfastened her bra. He took it from her outstretched arms and then bent to take a hard pointed breast into his mouth.
Arch your back a bit for me, Gina. Perfect. Eyes closed. You're in that mood. We're not here.
ラッシュが隣に来て彼女の肘に手をやった。彼女とのダンスは僕がいただきますよ、ミスター・スタール。そう言うや否や、彼はサバンナをテーブルから連れ去った。このダンスパーティーにさえ一度も誘われたことがなかった。いつも踊っている友達を遠くで眺めて羨んでいた。そう思うと早くから決めていたけれど、まさか今日のシンデレラ物語が実際に舞踏会のシーンまで行くとは考えもしなかった。
We're sizzling hot, naked, about to get on. He's seducing you.
She'd never considered herself a sucker for a man in a uniform before. Her gaze trailed down across his shiny badge to the crisp folds of his shirt that clung tightly to his bronzed and muscular chest. A knight in shining armour. Once again, he seemed to have come to her rescue.
Stephen, do me a favour, don't be quite so straight. Thank you. No, I don't need the Regency pose.
Their lips met in the urgent fusing of two people who desired each other. And this time Candida didn't resist, but allowed herself the intoxicating pleasure of feeling his lusty maleness against her. Such ecstasy didn't belong here on earth. Was this a dream? The man she'd resented for so long loved her.
It's a bit of a light relief after Eileen. As you can see, Julie Moggan shot this, and she also has the most extraordinary way of finding characters, which you just, from those minute and a half, you just capture straight away what this film is about. It's about character, this film, and so I was very blessed. For an editor, it's a complete gift if you're given material like that, and it doesn't happen every day. I want to use this to talk about how an editor and a director can work together. And I also wanted to use it to talk about the difficulties of forming a narrative and also pace, which is a big thing when it comes to editing. So there I had all these extraordinary rushes. I could have just watched them all. I mean, there I sat there for my 3 weeks, as I talked to you about at the beginning, watching them, just laughing aloud at these rushes. I could have, Stephen, the male model. I mean, it's just priceless. You want it all in the film. It's all so good. But then you thought, well, okay, how am I going to actually tell this story? What is the story? I've got character, but what's my story? What's my kind of where's my epiphany at the end? Where's it going to be? And I looked at all the different stories, and then there's the Japanese lady in it. Her story is, and I'll just tell you very briefly. She sort of fantasizes about her sort of Prince Charming, the kind of perfect sort of David Beckham look, and she finds her husband she's just a bit bored, and she reads these fantasies, and she very openly admits she reads these fantasies in these Mills and Boon novels that kind of to try and she tells her husband, can't you be a bit more like the men in the Mills and Boon, and then Julie manages, they have complete trust in Julie, she manages to capture all this on camera. And she has this sort of fantasy affair with her dance teacher. She learns to dance, and but it's a fantasy affair. It's not a real affair. And then towards the end, towards sort of the middle of the film, she then actually she decides to take her husband along to ballroom dance lessons, and it's just not his thing. I mean, he's got 2 left feet, but anyway, he tries really hard, and you completely feel for him, and you're gunning for him because he's desperate to sort of please his wife. So we've got that kind of arc, and there he is, trying to sort of make it all work, and he's trying to be the fantasy figure, and then Julie sort of got a phone call saying, they were in a dance competition. Can you come over and film that? And so she went over and filmed it, and actually they won the dance competition. So there you've got this sort of, it's almost like this real life Mills and Boon fantasy plays out, and there we had it. We thought, great, fantastic Mills and Boon story. They win the dance competition, they're in love, fantastic. And so in the way that became the kind of, we then sort of made the film a bit like a Mills and Boon novel. And all the other characters, so that was the narrative spine. We had it was strong, we had great character, we had great scenes, we had great situation. We then had to sort of make all the other characters sort of work within that. And so what you end up having is lots of different, completely unrelated narratives. This is the thing, unrelated narratives that have to link. And they have to be like a sort of, I imagine, a cog, sort of driving each other. And where you place those stories is absolutely crucial. And it's one of the most difficult sort of editing jobs I've done, to try and get that to work. And we used Roger, the main, the writer. He was became a kind of storyteller as opposed to one, essentially a character. So he sort of helped us shape and drive our narrative and make it feel more like a Mills and Boon book. It was a big challenge, and I always sort of go back to the old-fashioned way of putting cards up in my cutting room. So I'll literally I'll have colour-coded cards for different characters. We had all the scenes mapped out, and then you put them all up on, you've got your Act 1, Act 2 and Act 3. You can sort of get a good picture of how that film's going to come together, because they're colour-coded. Am I seeing too much of one character? Has this character outstayed its welcome? When do I need to come back to this character? Hang on, we haven't seen Roger for a while. It's very difficult to sort of lose your characters, and it's a big juggling act to sort of get them in, so that you always feel you have had enough of them, but not too much of them, and it's actually also at the same time driving that story. So yes.
Here's a question. So Roger becoming the narrative figure, was that purely based on the existing rushes you had, or did you go back and film more?
No, we didn't film more. She'd shot it all. The only additional stuff she filmed was more stuff with Stephen, who then finds his twin flame, the male model, and then the dance competition, which I said earlier, where they won the dance competition. No, Roger, I think it was a question of watching and thinking, how is he a character in this film? He's not a character in the same way as the other characters are. He's more of a sort of Greek chorus character. He sort of sits on the peripheral. And actually, that's a very handy device as an editor to be able to use as a sort of framework to kind of bind your story and give you that sort of structure, which is so difficult because the whole thing is artificial. I mean, it's a very constructed film. They're real people, they're real moments, but the construction is artificial. So very interesting challenge. And one more thing I wanted to talk about with this, which I think is really important. Julie Moggan, the director, she's actually a ballet dancer. And we had this sort of motto that when we were going to cut it, we'd have our pace would be slow, slow, quick, quick, slow. And I think, what that really was about is that when you're trying to cut a film like this, you've got to surprise the audience with pace. You can't have the same pace for 90 minutes, people will get bored. So you've got to surprise them, you've got to go slow, you've got to go fast. You've got to understand that certain scenes are not about conveying information. They're about making your audience feel a certain way, whether it's make your audience feel happy, make them feel sad, make them feel high. And that's as important a part of storytelling as conveying facts or information. I think especially when you're talking about feature docs, and you've got to actually keep the bums on the seats for 90 minutes, you've got to take the audience on a sort of experience where they sort of, they can sort of let go, or they can, you've got to have your highs and your lows, and that is very much about pace. So there was one particular, Julie, being the director, she was there, she shot these scenes, she knows every bit too, and I'd say, but hang on, it's too long. She said, but what about the bit when? What about this? And well, yes, it's all great, but actually, what happens when you put a documentary together is that you're endowing these characters or these scenes with a new sort of time. It's screen time. It's not about what really happened, it's screen time. So it's about how long do I want to make my audience feel happy for before I actually make them feel sad. So that's a kind of, sort of a tricky one to explain, but it's not always about what really happened or how long something really lasted. And that, I think, is a difficult one for an editor. How long should a scene last? When has it outstayed its welcome? When am I ready for something else? And when you haven't got a specific narrative, that is a harder one to juggle.
How do you know when's the right point to put them in, or how to develop the other characters? Again,
I think that probably goes back to your 3 weeks with your headphones on at the beginning. I think at those times, you think to yourself, I really laughed at that bit, or I really cried, something really touched me. And if you were watching that same scene maybe in a cutting room with a bunch of people, sort of 6 weeks later, you might not have that. So you would sort of maybe the magic. You know as an editor when you first watched it whether it's that material is going to stand up. And I think you get a good idea from your initial watch what material is going to really stand up in this film. And there's always issues of sometimes, I mean, as well, sometimes the best material has to go on the cutting room floor. And that's another horrible thing for directors, because you can shoot gold dust, but it doesn't work in the film. You put it together and you think, but I've lost my gold dust, and sometimes you have to lose your gold dust because it just doesn't work with the overall structure. And there were so many moments with Julie. I mean, she just shot really amazing stuff, but we couldn't actually put it in the film in the end because it's a bit like it sort of has this knock-on effect. You know, one thing isn't quite gelling, and then the whole lot just falls apart. So you know, it's a very difficult balance. I'm now going to talk about The End of the Line, which is a film I cut a few years back. This is a film based on Charles Clover's book, The End of the Line, which is about the crash in the world's fish stocks, so sort of overfishing. I think, you know, when I was asked to do this film, you think, oh, it's a film about overfishing. It sounds a bit boring. Do I want to do that? And then you kind of ask yourself, and you meet the director, and you think, what sort of film, what is this film? And you think, actually, it's not a film about overfishing at all. This is a campaign. This is a film about changing public perception. This is a film about changing how people think about their food, how people see the world. And so suddenly you think, okay, God, how am I going to do that? How am I going to tell that story? And your job as a storyteller is to you've got to win people over. You've got to win their hearts. You're not telling a story about overfishing. You're winning the hearts of everybody that watches that film. And so your storytelling device is going to be very different to as if you were telling a historical story about overfishing. So you're going to be thinking about ways of how am I going to win those hearts. And I think when you're making a campaigning film, personally, for me, you can't win people's hearts by telling them what they ought to think about how awful the world is. You're never going to win a heart that way. And a lot of campaigning films do that. And it doesn't work. Just to sort of tell you a bit about the background of what this film did, it won the award for the Social Impact Award for actually changing we changed public policy. A lot of people, it raised huge awareness, this film. So it actually did the job that the director set out to do, which was to make a campaign. Not a film, a campaign, or a film that was a campaign. So, you know, interesting relationship there. So the first clip I'm going to show you is a clip from the opening act, which is it's a kind of MacGuffin. I don't know whether it's a kind of trick, if you like. We changed the film. We sort of structured the film as a kind of whodunit detective story, so that you're actually taking your audience on a journey where they are feeling that they're actually discovering something with you. They're going on not being told what to think. They're going on a journey of discovery. So by the end, they've actually discovered who done it. Well, it was you, because you ate all the fish. And so you then think, oh, God, it was me. I better do something about it. And suddenly you've won them. So that sort of structure is just a different way of trying to win someone over. It's sort of winning an argument. Quite manipulative. It is manipulative, but it's a different sort of storytelling device. So this is my opening. This is my it's a section towards the end of the first act, which I'm going to show you now, and we'll talk about why we put it there afterwards.
After the collapse of the cod, a new breed of fisheries scientists started to investigate what had been happening to all the fish in every ocean of the world. Local catches of fish had been declining almost everywhere. But what puzzled the scientists in 2001 was that the total world catch kept going up and up. It didn't make sense.
The concerns that people had expressed that local stocks were going down everywhere, but that global statistics were showing an increase, that this was a discrepancy.
Daniel Pauly, a leading expert in global fishing, was asked by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization to investigate this mystery.
Daniel Pauly had the brilliance to start examining why, in the face of the evidence that you saw in front of you locally, and in the face of evidence like Newfoundland, that the figures kept going up.
It was when Pauly and his colleagues looked at the reported catches from China that they found their answer.
For every part of the world, the reporting was right, except for Chinese waters.
When Daniel Pauly came to this department and he said, I think they're wrong. I said, what do you mean they're wrong? He said, well, it can't be that China's catching that much.
And they found that actually when you looked at the biological productivity of the sea and what we know about it everywhere else, the Chinese figures could not be right. They were just made up. They were made up by communist officials who only got preferment if the graphs went up. Graphs kept going up because they kept making up the figures. And it was a huge seismic moment.
We concluded that they were so biased upward, so much, that if you corrected for this effect, the world catch would not be increasing, but decreasing.
For the first time in human history, the future of the food the world gets from the sea was in doubt.
Sent a shiver down my spine because that was the one thing that a lot of people were holding on to. Well, things may be bad, but at least we're catching lots and we're catching more every year, so it can't be that bad.
From about 1988, we now realize it was on the way down. And we only figured that out in 2002.
All of these things were like warning signals, and they were telling a story in aspects.
This is a story that was going on at the same time as human influences elsewhere, but it's been told late. It's been told we haven't had so much time to do something about it. Now it's on us. And now, in the next maybe 40, 50 years, it's crisis, it's crash, it's do something about it time. And that's why this is arguably one of the biggest problems in the world.
So what's interesting about that was, when you're an editor and you're trying to put together a film like this where you've got a lot of statistics. I mean, statistics are dead boring, actually, when you're trying to convey that cinematically. It could be dead boring. So you need to find a way that's going to be engaging. So we've made it into a mystery, we've made it into this big puzzle. And there is a puzzle, but that also is to do with the way it's cut. So again, it's a way of sort of engaging your audience in a mystery early on, into sort of the whodunit structure. And it's also a way of introducing the scientists. So they're not just kind of talking heads appearing, they're engaged in part of this journey that you're going to go on to, because you've got to find out, what happened. The other thing as well, which if you're asked to cut a film and your brief is they want a feature doc, you've got to look for that jeopardy. You've got to look for that drama. It'll be in there. If there's no drama, if there's no tension, then it's very hard to sustain a film. I mean, you need when you go for that initial meeting with your director, you're going to turn around and you're going to say, well, where's the heart? Where's the drama? What's the jeopardy? How am I going to... For a feature length, if you don't have that, it's going to be very difficult. And it's often there in your rushes. You've got to find it. And it may not always be obvious what that drama is, but even that little sequence there about boring Chinese figures can be made quite dramatic, and also serve as a sort of a great storytelling device to sort of set you off on a mystery. So that's quite an interesting. That was quite an interesting film to structure. What I was saying to you earlier about trying to win your audience over, there's nothing worse than being harangued and being told, you know, how awful the world is, because then you kind of give up. You have to have hope. And Rupert, again, he found the most amazing characters, the most unusual characters to tell his story. And I want to show you a clip that was, this is a sequence from Senegal, and it's about the Europeans taking the fish rights from the locals. You'll see, he explains it in the clip, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
Taxpayers from the Western world pay for the largest fishing boats on the planet, super trawlers, to fish the distant waters. The locals and their pirogues don't stand a chance.
That's no good for the fishermen, that's no good for our sea. That's good just for European fishermen and government in Senegal, because he have a lot of money.
Haidar has dived the waters off Senegal for the last 35 years and has witnessed huge changes to the health of the local ocean. He is campaigning against foreign boats fishing in his waters.
When I see this, I want to fight with this guy. I want to fight with this industrial boat. I want to fight with the government who take just money and don't know what to do. I want to fight with the world, because the world's going to be dead. It's not possible.
As the fish have been taken by foreign fleets, fishermen like Adama have been left with an impossible decision. Should he leave his family and risk the dangerous journey to Europe?
Dafa metti trop parce que man duma neub sama bop quoi. Le voyage bi bama ko bëggé def ni luma yek sama yaram moy que sama yaram luma ci ñëk yek moy ko wóor na wóorul la ñëk def sama yaram xam parce que mom instant yi man gëm naa ni ma ngi dem ci géej gi mais wóorul mais awma luma gënal toujours man sama bor daf fi gëna metti xam nga ñi buñu maggé buñu fekkul man awma dara lan lay def.
The fish goes, the people are made poorer, and what happens? They try to immigrate. The Europeans like our fish, but they don't like the people. The fish has visa to come in, but the people are turned back.
I think that man is not going to change, and the sea going to be dead, because man is crazy. We are crazy. Our world is crazy world.
I also want to talk specifically about the shot of the pirogue leaving. Now, what's interesting about that is that's not really Adama leaving. That's not what really happened. But what the storytelling is, the emotional key to that scene is the pain of hope. So the pain of his hope is what carries that scene and what makes an audience engage. And I think often despair, simple despair, too much despair can be too much for an audience and they'll switch off. So there you've got this scene of him leaving, and you know in your heart it's not going to be okay. And so that's where you'll engage, because you'll put your own narrative onto that. So that was sort of quite an interesting choice of do we have, because we're not pretending to the audience that he really is leaving. I think we all know he's not really leaving. We had that shot, and it was part of the story. But it was just a sort of interesting way of looking at it. And so again, that going back to the conversation that I had with Rupert when we first met, what sort of film do you want to make? I want to make a film that's going to change public perception. I want to make a film it's going to change the world, and it did. And I think it's moments like that actually take you on that journey. It certainly worked for me. And then the other character, Haidar, the diver, who's sort of in the water saying, the world's it's a crazy world and the sea's going to be dead. And he says it with a smile on his face. And you laugh. And because you laugh, you engage and you care. And if it was someone just saying, God, ain't the world awful, it's awful, it's awful, it's all going to end, and people don't engage. They'll engage with a smile, with that sort of human, with that warmth of the character of Haidar. And then Rupert got this extraordinary shot, which I love, where he takes the fish from the net and he strokes it and lets it go. And it's just a really symbolic moment. So obviously that had to go in. But Rupert would always capture these moments. So I was lucky to have that.
Claire?
Yes?
You've worked with 4 very different directors with very different agendas. Do you think you could just speak for a minute about how you work with them in the cutting room? I mean, do they sit with you every day? Do you cut? Do they come back? Are they all different?
I like to be on my own, certainly to watch the rushes, as I've said. And then what I'll tend to do, and it can be very different. I mean, if you work with a director like Nick Broomfield, I mean, he's made more films than I've had hot dinners, and it was my first film. So he taught me everything I know about structure. So that's different. Although I still did all my same process of watching the rushes, and we used to have bets on who knew the rushes best, and I'd always win. But what I do is I tend to present a director with, once I've watched the rushes, with a paper structure, and say, right, this is how I see it working. This is how I see this shape working. This is how I see where we're going to sort of end up, and what we've got to make it end up. And maybe there's a hole here and a hole there, but this is, and then they'll look at that and say, yes, no, maybe this, that, and we just talk about it. And then I'll probably go away and put together a building block structure of that edit. I mean, this is the ideal way, is you put together that, and you don't worry about whether it looks good or cool cut. It's there's the building blocks really to tell that story. And then once you've got that, which you hope to put together pretty fast, which is why you don't worry about, you don't worry about the aesthetics as much, it's more about the storytelling. Once you've got that, then you can reject it. You've got to have, with documentary, because you don't have a script as you would in fiction, you need to get as fast as you can to a shape that you can reject. And once you're rejecting it, you're going to build and build and build, and it's going to get better, and it's going to get better and better. So that's how I tend to do it. And in order to be able to do that, you need to know your rushes well. You need to really have a strong sense of what's there, and also what isn't there, and is anything missing. So I tend to would do that with all of my directors, and it's also a great way of engaging in a dialogue early, and sort of bouncing out ideas off each other. So it sort of tends to work, and then you're starting with something concrete. There's nothing worse than sort of. I like to go in the morning and know what I'm going to cut that day. I like to know that by the end of the day I've done this or done that, because it can be so amorphous at the beginning, and you're cutting a feature film. You've got 500 hours. You could do anything. You could tell any story. So you kind of want to really get to a structure as fast as possible. And I think it tends to, if you can do that, it will speed up your process. So that answers the question. Anything more? So now I'm going to show you my favourite, my sort of fun bit of editing. When I did, I talked about to you at the beginning, with Bob Dylan rehearsing with George Harrison on stage. Now Bob Dylan, he didn't really like being filmed, and he doesn't like, he was quite that day and age was quite controlling of what people saw or didn't see that was filmed, and so things would be concerts. If he didn't like something straight away, not to be seen again. So there was various songs that I'm taking you to the concert for Bangladesh, which was shot in 1971. It was George Harrison's tribute concert, first tribute concert ever, first time that musicians had got together to raise money for charity.
If not for you, winter would hold no spring. Couldn't hear a robin sing. This wouldn't have a clue. If not for you.
My relationship with Bob is, you know, I just always tried to be straight with him, and you know, he responded.
Bob would come in and rehearse with the band what songs he was going to do. And so it was really a matter of working it out at the last minute.
Not for you, the sky would fall, rain would gather too. Without your love, I'd be nowhere at all. I'd be lost if not for you. If not for you, the winter would hold no spring.
Right up until the moment he stepped on the stage, he was not sure he was coming. Because the night before we went to Madison Square Garden, he saw all these cameras and microphones and this huge place, and he was saying, hey man, this isn't my scene. I can't make this. By that time, I'd had so much on my plate trying to get it organized. And I was saying, it's not my scene either. I don't do this every day. In fact, this is the first time I've ever done anything on my own. You at least have been a solo artist for years. So on stage, I had a little list on my guitar, and I had a point where it said, after Here Comes the Sun, it just had I put Bob with a question mark. And it got to that point, and I looked around to see if there was any indication if Bob was going to come on or not.
I remember the stage being dark, and I looked around, and here's this guy in a jean jacket walking toward me, and I knew it was him.
He was all ready, though. He was so nervous, and he had his harmonica on and his guitar in his hand, and he was walking right on the stage. It was like, now or never. And so I just say,
Like to bring on a friend of us all, Mr. Bob Dylan.
When you have a project like that, which is really told through archive, I mean, there's kind of two ways of thinking about it. Either you're using your archive to sort of illustrate your story, or you're using your archive to drive your story. And, you know, when I put this together, this was 2005, and George had passed away, and it was his story, so I wanted George to tell the story. I didn't want a voiceover. It didn't work. A voiceover would never have worked. It was George. And so I went through every radio interview he'd done discussing Bangladesh, every single interview that existed, and sort of piece it all together. So the whole thing is told by George, and George is our central character. And I think, you know, if you approach it in that way, I mean, it does feel alive, and you do feel like you're there. And I think that's, you know, you're very blessed when you're given archive like that. It was, yeah, that was for me the moment I sort of dug up the treasure trove underneath Tottenham Court Road, and it was a wonderful time editing. But ask questions. Feel free to. Does anyone have any questions?
What do you think of cutaways now? Do you use cutaways much, or what?
I think adding cutaways can give a sort of different sort of atmosphere to your scene. And maybe it's a question of what atmosphere do you want. And I mean, no, it wouldn't feel cinematic cutting to a talking head, or cutting to a nodding head, or, you know, someone's shoe. It might be, you know, for example, you could have someone. Imagine I was cutting, you know, Ringo on the drums. Then I might cut to somebody's tapping foot, or I might cut to an audience's tapping foot, or because then that's different, because it's not really a cutaway, it's the story. It is a cutaway in a way, but it's sort of serving the story. So maybe I would differentiate like that. If it sort of felt it gelled, then that's okay. And I suppose you don't really know why something gels. It sort of just does or doesn't.
Do you get more out of cutting fiction or documentary?
It's a different bit of your brain, I think, that you use. I mean, I think in many ways, I mean, I suppose, you know, fiction is you're getting the best performance out of an actor as well. I mean, there's that whole side to it. I think it's used, and you're not challenged in the way of trying to come up with a structure with fiction. Yes, you have a script, and you don't always stick to that script. You may, when you've actually put the whole film together in fiction, you see it and realise actually it doesn't work, or I'm going to have to put the beginning at the end and the end at the beginning, and blah blah blah. And actually, this whole battle scene that cost, you know, £1 million doesn't serve the story, so let's cut it. So it's different sorts of challenges, but no, I think it is using a different part of your brain, I'd say.
But one of the things I'd be interested to hear personally is how you keep track of all of this material and how you mark it up so that you can find it. How good your memory is. It's still, where is it in the computer, question mark?
Because I come from a fiction background, I worked as an assistant editor for years, and I also worked as an assistant editor before Avid. So we'd cut, it was all on film, 35mm film hanging in bins. So to really know what was where, you know, you couldn't lose a frame, you couldn't use a trim, otherwise you'd be fired. You'd have to know straight away, look, that bit, that take, that, etc. So I organised my documentary as if I was organising fiction. So I think of my documentary in terms of setups for a scene, and I think of my material in terms of scenes. So I'll sort of crystallise that in my head, this is this scene, this is that scene. And I'll look, you know, for my visuals, I will line my visuals up as if I was organising a bin in fiction of, you know, what setups do I have for this scene? Do I have, you know, close, wide, medium, mid-shot, blah, blah, blah. I'll do the same in doc. So I can see it straight away. And I will organise my bins as scenes. So that the answer to that is I've stolen that. Because it's so organised and because there's a system in fiction that is used all over the world, you know, whether you're working in the UK or America, you know, the way your slating system works, you know, etc. It's sort of universal. Slightly different in America, but the whole way, you know, you could walk into anybody else's cutting room as an assistant editor and you know straight away how to find something because there's a sort of discipline which everybody sticks to. And I think I've stolen that. And maybe it's that's made me really kind of meticulous about how I organise my rushes. It's probably I've just stolen it because it's so important.
So do you name the scenes rather than number them? Or?
I don't number them, I'll name them. So, yeah, I mean, once I've sort of done my structure, I'll then kind of have more, it's so much easier in the Abbey, you have more bins and I'll have, okay, so I'll know that I've cut, for example, I've cut Senegal, so I think, right, I know that, you know, Rupert went off and he shot probably 6 or 7 hours of Senegal. I'll go through those rushes again and I will log visually everything he shot so that I know I'm not going to miss out on all those gems because it's so beautifully shot, I can't miss one gem. So I have all the visual setups in one bin, you know, arriving at Senegal or, you know, Adama on the beach, all the visuals for Adama on the beach, getting to Senegal, leaving Senegal or whatever, and it'll all be in bins visuals straight away so I can find them. And then in addition to that are my sync rushes of, you know, the different scientists and what they've said, and they'll all be put in those scene bins too. So every piece of sync, if it's Bob Dylan, it would be BD, what he says, GH, blah, blah, blah. Always find it straight away, who's spoken, put all that into that scene. I've logged it as I've gone through my first time, then I'll just put them into that bin, find it straight away, as if it was fiction. You know, in fiction you'd have a marked up script, you'd have your script, okay, here we go, for this scene here on this page, I've got, these rushes are covering it, I've got these setups, these rushes I can go straight in, and it's sort of similar in doc.
Have you ever worked on a film where you think they've missed the real story in the rushes, or there's been a kind of greater story there?
I think when you start working with a director, you kind of have to get on with, you get on. I mean, you probably wouldn't take, if you went for a meeting with somebody and you didn't really get on, you probably wouldn't take the job. You've got to get on. So I think fundamentally, and there is that trust between a director and an editor. Sort of. So has it ever happened where I've thought, God, this would be so much better this way? Well, yes, I would say I think it'd be better this way, but the director might disagree. So that can happen. But you know, ultimately, it's the director's film. It's not your film.
Your relationship with characters is that you've never met them, whereas the director's relationship and the trust they've built, they might feel a bit more morally obliged to be faithful to that, whereas you have the ability to push the director, but this would be such a better cut. Yes.
I mean, I think that does come into it, the whole... I mean, I think directors, when they've actually been with these characters and they've sort of lived through moments with these characters, they do have a sort of personal, often sort of personal need to show or not show something. That does come into it all the time. There isn't an easy answer to the question. I think in a way, the other thing which is why an editor is important in the process is that they do have that distance. And I think that's a really important thing. I think a director can get too close to material and can sort of have, and not necessarily realise why they're in love with something. There's often an agenda that isn't, they may not realise themselves, and it's because of something that's happened that you're completely unaware of because you weren't there. So I think that's something to bear in mind. I mean, there's not an easy answer to that.
In the Eileen film, there's an amazing shot which blew me away towards the end, where you see all the media circus that's all surrounded it, and that really affected me emotionally. I thought that a different type of filmmaker might have taken that and put it right at the beginning, as if to say, look how important this story is that I'm making here. Is it confidence? You know, you say, right, I'm going to hold off on the big... those big moments, and is that just, again, is that like an instinct thing with you?
So, I mean, I know the shot you're talking about, because actually that shot got a lot of attention in the press. I think I can remember one of the reviewers saying how Joan Churchill had set it up with all the lighting. And I thought, you've completely missed the point. You know, Joan was in the car with Nick on the way to the execution, and there it was in front of her, and it's just so extraordinarily shot that the person who wrote the review assumed that she'd set it up, and that you know, Joan would never light somebody. She would never do that. She doesn't believe in that. She wouldn't light somebody or artificially manipulate something with lighting. She wouldn't. That's just not how she would work. And so that shot, yes, it was an extraordinary shot. It felt it should go there. I'll tell you why. It's funny. I can feel that shot now. I can feel it in my bones, because it was very early in the morning. It was about sort of 5 in the morning, and Nick and Joan were very tense, very tense. Nick was particularly tense that day, that shot just captures the essence of that morning, and that anticipation. So I think it could only have belonged there. And that's where it was in the story. It was exactly chronologically there. And Nick actually, when he films, is sort of quite faithful like that. He doesn't tend to sort of switch things around in the same way as a lot of people would. It is very much, that is what happened.
How do you feel about narration in documentary?
I think if narration is part of the character of the film, I mean, you think of Nick. I mean, he's not narration; he's a character. He, is a character, and his presence within that film allows him to confront sort of certain truths that he wouldn't if he was the other side of a camera. So that's sort of a different. Put that in one box. I think. It's funny. It's very in vogue now, where a director will come to me and say, "I don't want any narration. I want it to feel like cinema, and I want it to be unfolding in front of me. No narration at all." It's sort of somehow frowned upon. I know it's very frowned upon at the film school to use narration. This is what I've heard anyway. And all I can say is you've got to be a very skilled director to be able to pull it off without narration. If there is, I don't think narration should be seen as failure. Narration from the director, I don't see it as failure. People see it as somehow they fail because they've had to use a narrator, and I don't think I don't share that view actually. I think it depends on the sort of story you're told, but for example, with Up in Smoke, Adam didn't want to use any narration at all. And all I can say, I remember sitting down with him on the stairs and saying, Adam, you're going to have to be in your film. He said, not over my dead body. I said, well, then I can't make your film work because I don't have the material to make it work without narration. And it's not a failure in him. Actually, he's a character in his film because he's on that journey too. He's the one that jacked in his job, bought the camera, went off and, you know, so he's very much part of that. He's part of that narrative and he's a character. The narrator has to be a character. I think if it's sort of distance and not part of it, that can be a bit odd. I don't know. That's just some thoughts. It's not an opinion.
And thank you very, very much for your contribution.